Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something I think we all think about, uh, how much of an impact our parents and our teachers, even our friends, have on our lives. We've got this really interesting analysis we're going to be looking at today that really kind of digs into all the good things, but also some of the maybe not so good things about these close relationships.
Mhm.
And it really makes you wonder, like, why do some people say, oh, I owe my entire success to this one teacher, or, one friendship can completely change somebody's life?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, right? Like when you hear those stories. So this analysis, it actually kind of gets into the nitty-gritty of how these influences work on us, how they really affect us. We always say that parents lay the foundation, right? But this goes way deeper than just providing, love and values and all that good stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I thought it was really interesting what they said about early parental support.
Yeah.
It's not just about being there, physically, but it's also about the kind of support that you're giving.
Yeah, exactly. And this analysis highlights that early on, when you're a kid, things like encouraging curiosity and providing, that safe and secure environment can really have a huge impact on how resilient you are later in life. And even things like how well you do in school later on, years later, it really makes you think about all those little interactions you have early on with your parents and what kind of impact they have long term.
Yeah, it really does. And then when we get into teachers, the analysis points out how a really good teacher can be like a mentor to you,
Yeah.
someone who sees things in you that you don't even see in yourself.
Yeah, and it's not just about, inspiring students. The research actually shows that using good teaching methods can directly affect a student's self-esteem and even their ability to problem solve. So it's not just about, memorizing a bunch of facts. It's really about developing those critical thinking skills that you can use throughout your whole life.
That reminds me of my history teacher in high school, Mrs. Thompson. She had this amazing way of connecting things that happened, way back when to stuff that was going on, at the time. And it just made learning so much more interesting.
Exactly. And that's where a great teacher can really, make a difference by helping you to love learning and giving you the tools to think for yourself.
Now, of course, we can't forget about friends. Anyone who's been a teenager knows how important those friendships are. And the analysis really emphasizes, how friends give us that emotional support, especially when you're going through all those tough times as a teenager.
But you know what I find really interesting is how that support that your friends give you translates into real tangible benefits. The research shows that when you have strong friendships, it can actually be good for your physical health. And some studies even show that it can help you live longer. So it's not just about, having someone to hang out with. It's about those connections that affect our whole well-being.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the quality of your relationships, doesn't it? Let's be honest here. Not all of the influences in our lives are all positive and happy, you know. This analysis also looks at how some of these relationships can have negative impacts, even when people have good intentions.
Yeah, and that's where things start to get really interesting. Like, take overprotective parents, for example. A lot of times we think of that as a form of love, right? But this analysis shows some surprising downsides to that.
Yeah, I was actually surprised to read that being overprotective can actually make it harder for a child to become independent and to deal with challenges later in life. You think you're doing the right thing by trying to protect them from everything, but it can actually backfire.
Yeah, and it goes even further than that. The analysis explains how a parent's own anxieties can actually be passed down to their kids without them even realizing it. It's kind of like a ripple effect.
Whoa, okay, that's kind of intense. But it makes sense. We've all seen families where the parent stress just seems to rub off on the kids.
Oh, absolutely. And this isn't just about parents either. This analysis also gets into the effects of teachers who, maybe they mean well, but they end up creating a really negative learning environment.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely relate to that. I remember I had this one teacher who was so focused on being strict and keeping everyone in line that it just killed any kind of creativity or fun in the classroom.
Yeah, the analysis actually uses the term toxic pedagogy to describe those kinds of teaching practices, the ones that make students feel scared or anxious or just like they can't do anything right. It's almost like those negative teaching styles can like accidentally make students believe, they're not good at learning or their ideas don't matter or something.
Yeah, that's really sad. But I think it happens more than we realize. And this analysis also looks at, the not so good side of friendships too. It really digs into how peer pressure can lead people, to do things they wouldn't normally do.
Yeah. Right. And what's interesting is it goes beyond just peer pressure. The
Yeah.
analysis talks about how certain personality types, like if someone has low self-esteem or really wants to be liked, they're more likely to be influenced negatively, even by friends they really care about.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It means that we need to recognize those things in ourselves, those vulnerabilities, because if we don't, we might end up, always being swayed by what other people think, even if it goes against, what we believe in.
Exactly. And the analysis uses this really interesting example to show this. It talks about this young guy named David who had a lot of social anxiety and really wanted to fit in. And he ends up hanging out with this group of friends who were into some pretty risky stuff, things that David knew weren't good for him.
Oh, man. I think we've all known a David at some point. Right?
Yeah.
You want to support them, but you can also see that things might not end well.
And that's exactly what happened. The analysis says that David's need to be accepted was so strong that he ignored his own better judgment. And he ended up doing things that were totally out of character for him. It just shows how powerful social influence can be, especially when we're feeling insecure.
It's a good reminder that we need to be careful about who we spend time with, especially, when we're younger. But I think this is true for adults too. We can still be influenced by people around us, even when we think we've got it all figured out.
Oh, absolutely. The analysis makes it clear that influence is something that happens our whole lives. It's not like we graduate from high school or college and suddenly we're immune to it. And that's why it's so important to have a good support system, people who encourage us to be our best.
I love that. It's like having your own personal cheerleading squad,
Yeah.
but also people who will be honest with you when you need to hear it.
Exactly. That support system can be family, friends, mentors, even therapists. The key is having people you trust who can give you different perspectives and help you stay grounded. But the analysis also reminds us that influence isn't just a one-way street. We're influencing other people all the time too, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, that's a powerful thought. Makes you
Yeah.
think about, the impact of your actions and how you might be shaping the people around you.
But like we're all connected in this web of influence,
Yeah.
constantly affecting each other. And that's why I think the analysis ends with this really thought-provoking question.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the question?
It asks, who has been the most influential figure in your life, and how did they shape who you are today? It's like an invitation to think about our own experiences, and consider both the good and the bad ways other people have affected us.
Wow, that's deep. I need a minute to think about that one. What about you? Does anyone come to mind right away?
That's a tough one. For me, it's not really about one specific person. It's more like a combination of all the amazing mentors and friends and family I've had in my life. They've all contributed to who I am in different ways. But I think that's a good example of how influence isn't always about, these big dramatic events or moments. Sometimes it's those small everyday interactions that really shape what we believe and how we act.
I love that. It reminds us that we're always learning and growing for the people around us. And we have the power to be that positive influence on others too.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about this whole idea of influence. It's this dynamic process that's always changing. And we have the ability to shape it in a way that's good for us and for the people around us.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm already starting to look at my own relationships differently. But before we wrap up, I want to hear from our listeners. Who has been the most influential person in your life? And how do they shape who you are today? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's amazing how we can just go through life surrounded by all these influences and not really realize how much they're shaping us. This deep dive has really made me think about all the ways our parents, our teachers, even our friends influence who we become, in ways we don't even realize.
Yeah, it's like we've been pulling back the curtain on this whole web of connections,
Mhm.
right? And the analysis does a great job of showing how those connections can be both really powerful and also sometimes hold us back.
One of the things that really stuck with me was that idea of toxic pedagogy. It's kind of scary to think that a teacher's approach could actually make students feel helpless, even if they're trying to help.
Right. That's the thing about influence. It's not always intentional. Like, we might be unconsciously copying things we learned from our own parents or teachers without realizing how it's affecting other people.
It's like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize how important it is to be aware of the kind of influence we're having on others.
Absolutely. And, the analysis has some really interesting advice on how we can create positive influence in our own lives. It talks about things like self-awareness, setting boundaries, and surrounding ourselves with people who support our growth.
I really like that idea of having a supporting team around you. It reminds me of that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. The people we hang out with have a huge impact on our attitudes, our beliefs, even how we act. And that's why it's so important to choose carefully who we let into our inner circle.
So what can we do if we realize we're in a relationship that's not good for us, whether it's with a parent, a friend, or even someone we work with.
Well, the analysis really stresses the importance of being open and honest,
Hmm.
talking about it. It encourages us to say what we need, to set boundaries, and even be willing to walk away if the relationship is hurting us.
Yeah, that's not always easy to do,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to family or friends we've known for a long time. But sometimes you just got to have those tough conversations for your own well-being.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about protecting ourselves, we're influencing other people too. By making those tough choices, we might actually inspire someone else to do the same.
That's a powerful ripple effect.
Mm.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Who are you being for the people around you? Are you the kind of influence that lifts people up, empowers them, and helps them grow? Or are you maybe, without realizing it, continuing patterns that hold people back?
That's a really good question to think about. Because we all have the power to make a difference, both in our own lives and in the lives of those we touch.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us on this journey today. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, and I hope everyone listening got as much out of it as I did. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.